Hi everybody, this is going to be an extra video today for Hezekiah Alexander Day. I am going to the Charlotte Museum of History and I'm going to take a guided tour of the Hezekiah Alexander house. I'm going to go ahead and tell you up front, I will be in a tour of a lot of people. So there may be a lot of times where the footage is awkward or weird, or I'm zoomed in filming something, or maybe I have to move the camera suddenly. I try as hard as I can not to film other people who are on tours with me when I visit museums. I don't want to ruin the experience for them. But I definitely want the audio of the tour guide talking us through everything that we get to see. And I want to take you along for the tour too. If you've been here for all the Mecklenburg Declaration of Independence videos this month, you'll probably really enjoy this one because the original home of one of the signers of the Mecklenburg Declaration of Independence is still standing and it's in great shape. It's been furnished inside to look as close to period accurate as they can. And we're going to go take a guided tour of the house. I'm excited and I hope you are too. Okay guys, welcome to the Charlotte Museum of History. I am just standing out here on the street where you would first pull in because there is an iron historical marker for the Hezekiah Alexander house. You know, historical markers for me are kind of like Pokemon. I gotta collect them all, so we're gonna check this marker out real quick before we go into the museum. Inside is this really neat play area for kids, but there were no kids here today, so I didn't mind filming it really quick for you. It shows you different types of home structures that have been on this site over the years and how the Hezekiah Alexander house, being built of rock, is the only one that survives. I got really excited when I saw these shoes and realized what they were. I'm going to read you the sign. They were made by John McNitt Alexander, which we have talked about in another video. He was another signer of the Mecklenburg Declaration of Independence. And he made them for his daughter Margaret, who went by Peggy Alexander, when she got married to Francis Ramsey in 1789. Margaret, or Peggy, would have been the niece of Hezekiah and Mary Alexander. Those are the people that lived in the rock house we're going to go see. And I just thought it was so sweet that these shoes have survived and that they're on display here. I kind of squealed a little bit. I'm so happy that I can share them with you. This is a really cool thing to have survived through all these hundreds of years of history. I really respect the Charlotte Museum of History for doing their best not to forget about the enslaved people who also lived and worked at the Hezekiah Alexander home. So far, they've identified, I believe, over 24, maybe as many as 27 people who lived here, and they've actually been able to find out most of their names. They have not been able to find out much of their backstory, but they have honored them in art and depictions all over the property, and I think that's great. This is a Bohr millstone, and it was used in the 1800s to crush gold ore. A person or an animal would walk in a circle around the base. They could either be pushing a pole or pulling it with a harness, and as they moved, the upright stone would turn and crush the gold ore that was placed in the base, using the weight of the stone to grind it down. Next, we are walking up onto a statue which is called the Backcountry Patriot. This statue was actually an amalgamation that was made of the faces of 5 of Hezekiah Alexander's descendants. There was no contemporary painting of him, so we really don't know what he looked like. But this statue was created in his honor and the honor of his family, who once settled here. This was a 600-acre plantation, and they built their rock house in 1774. The Alexanders were a prominent family in the Carolina backcountry, and like many of the other settlers in this area, they were Scotch-Irish Presbyterians. Hezekiah's father, James Alexander, originally purchased 262 acres in this area. 4 years later, his older brother, John McNitt Alexander, arrived to claim the land, and then Hezekiah and their brother Ezekiel and 4 sisters followed, all bringing families with them. Hezekiah moved into Charlotte with his wife in 1767. His wife's name was Mary Sample, and at the time they had 6 children. Hezekiah was trained as a blacksmith, while his brother, John McNitt, was a weaver and a tailor. Hezekiah first bought 250 acres, then later an additional 350 acres, and became known as a very successful planter. All right, these are some of my first peeks at the 1774 rock house at the top of this hill. When it was built, it would have been one of, if not the largest and most lavish homes that had ever been built in Mecklenburg County. It quickly became a symbol of Hezekiah Alexander's wealth and power in a region that was sparsely populated at the time by European settlers. This house certainly would have impressed the locals of the area. It follows the Georgian architectural style that was named after King George III in England, with its symmetry and proportions meant to reference classical Greek and Roman architecture. The style was popularized in America around the year 1700, most notably at the Wren Building at the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia. The rock house's stone technique is also reminiscent of many stone houses that Hezekiah would have remembered from his younger years growing up in Maryland, which themselves were based on stonemason traditions of the Alexanders' ancestors in Scotland. This house contains 8 main rooms, 4 on each main floor, along with an attic and a cellar. The rooms are divided by wooden panels, and all said there is about 3,500 square feet of usable space inside the rock house, making it quite large even by today's standards. In addition, its construction out of stone was quite unique for the area, where most houses around here would have been single-room log structures. The rock house is a 2 feet thick stone structure, making it remarkably stable. The stones for this house were almost certainly quarried by enslaved workers on this site. It has not been confirmed the exact location from which the stones originated, but some people speculate that they may have been quarried from the bedrock in order to construct the cellar of the structure. There are also a few sites on this property where there is evidence of stone quarrying. The stones historically were held together with daub, a mixture of crushed oyster shells, lime, sand, and clay that functions like mortar and holds the stones in place. Between the house and the kitchen is a little path that runs through the herb garden, and it's laid out in the traditional English garden style of the day. There are a lot of plants here, not only just for eating, but many other plants for dyeing of clothes and wool, since this family was involved in textiles. This is not an old kitchen. This was built in the 1980s by students from the Central Piedmont Community College as part of an experiential archaeology program. Experiential archaeology is a method where researchers and students use historical tools, techniques, and methods to recreate past experiences, providing insights into how people lived and worked. In this case, the students not only built the kitchen, but they did so using 18th century construction techniques, from felling trees to assembling the log walls. The result is a historically accurate representation of what buildings in 18th century Charlotte would have looked like, and it is built directly on top of the foundation of an original kitchen here on this site. The original fireplace and hearth are still in place, indicating that this spot likely housed a kitchen when the Alexander family lived here. Kitchens were often separate from the main house to reduce the risk of fire, and it's believed that the original Alexander kitchen burned down many years ago. This barn is a 19th century tobacco barn that was moved from the Caldwell Farm in Cabarrus County, North Carolina. We know it was a tobacco barn because of the large gaps in between the logs that make up the structure. This would allow air to flow through the building and dry out tobacco leaves hanging inside. Although this is not an 18th century barn, it is located approximately where an outbuilding or a barn of some sort did exist in the 18th century when Hezekiah and the Alexander family lived here. We know that from multiple archaeology studies that have confirmed that there was a building in this area. Now we are walking down the hill away from the home towards the spring house, which is an original structure on this site built around the year 1774. It is one of the largest spring houses in the Carolinas, and it's very unique because of its stone construction. That's an indication both of Hezekiah's wealth and of the importance of the structure on the Alexander plantation. The location of this spring is likely a reason why the Alexanders chose this site for their home. At some point in the 19th century, the two side walls of this structure collapsed. The building was reconstructed in the 1960s to its original shape and size. A spring house had two very important functions on the home site. First, it was a source of very clean water for cooking, drinking, cleaning, and washing. Rainwater and creek water tended to be contaminated, and so that was not generally used for those purposes. But when the spring bubbles up from under the ground, that water is clean and drinkable. Inside the building is a much more mild temperature than outside, and that's because the spring water flowing through the building comes up from underground where the sun does not shine, and this water maintains a stable temperature all year long, about 55 degrees, which will affect the temperature inside the building. This would have been very useful on a dairy farm where cheese and butter would have filled up the whole first floor of this structure. It was like a refrigerator for them. You may notice a line stained on the wall from where the level of the water used to be at some point in the past. The water level is much lower today, as you can see here. The Charlotte Museum is working with hydrologists from UNC Charlotte to figure out what the reason is for the dropping water levels in this region and try to address that problem. This spring house actually has a second story, which is kind of unique. Its exact purpose was unknown, but it may have possibly been set up as a general store, since this spring house did face a road and could possibly have served the people passing by. We know that the Alexander property sat on a very significant trading route in those days, so it's speculated that travelers may have stopped by to buy bulk goods and foods from the Alexanders. The second story could have also been set up with a loom for textile production, or it may have just been used for storage.
The ramp you are standing on that leads to this part of the building is also original to the 18th century. Given that there was a road through the property, some have speculated that this second-story entrance might have actually been the front of the building for travelers who could use the ramp to approach the spring house on their horses or carriages.
Before the Alexanders arrived, this land was stewarded by the Catawba native people. Archaeological investigations suggest that the Catawba have lived here and have been creating their world-renowned pottery since at least 10,000 BCE. The landscape that the Catawba stewarded was more of a mixed prairie than the forest that it is today. River cane and river oats grew along the creek, along with American holly, milkweed, spice bush, and other various ferns. The Catawba utilized controlled burns in order to establish hunting grounds, and they cleared land to grow squash and corn. Many of the plants that we see here today are non-natives brought over by the Europeans, such as English ivy and wisteria. I am back inside the museum now, waiting for the guided tour to start, and I found these photographs really interesting. These are photos over time of the Hezekiah Alexander house. The first image is from 1935, when this house was still a private home, and at that time it had a large front porch, which was probably added around 1900, between 1900 and 1910. The second photograph was taken after 1960, when the local chapters of the Daughters of the American Revolution undertook a renovation of this property. They saved it from demolition and opened it as a house museum. Standing looking at the house from this side, we are looking at what might have been called the VIP entrance to the house. This door would have been reserved mostly for dignitaries, politicians, and other important guests who were invited to the residence. There was once a wagon road that circled in front of the house, and this was likely the road on which visitors would have traveled to the house. Once the visitor's carriage stopped in front of the house, a large stone inset into the grass may have served as a stepping stone known as a carriage block. To the right of the front door, the double door entrance that you can see leads down into the cellar. There's also another smaller staircase inside the house that provides access to the cellar too. On the side of the house is this really neat feature, which clearly was thought out as part of the original design of the house, as the rock walls are 2 feet thick and you don't just add windows after the walls are completed. This window functioned as a kind of serving window. Enslaved cooks or servants would have passed meals prepared in the log kitchen through this window into the main dining area of the rock house, keeping the process efficient and somewhat discreet.
You may notice an S-shaped carving next to a small circle above a symbol that looks like the number 7, or perhaps a page of a book. Above the front door is a carving that is much more difficult to make out. It appears to some as an anchor, a stick figure man with a bow and arrow, or perhaps a character from an unknown alphabet. Next, on the keystone above the bottom right window are the numbers 177 above a large X and the number 4. This may be a reference to the year 1774, the year the house was constructed. The bottom of the window extends all the way to the right edge of the house. On the cornerstone, there is a heart shape carved into the stone, alongside a shape that appears somewhat like a crown. An obvious interpretation might be that the stone carver was signaling their support for the British crown, but we have no way to confirm this theory. Now, look at the windowsill on the second story left window, and follow that toward the left edge of the building. On that cornerstone, the carving is a crude square and compass, and the carving on the right appears like a loop and is actually a sketch of a trowel. Given that both of these tools are essential stonemason tools, they are the carvings that most directly associate with Hezekiah's Freemasonry.
These many carvings may have had meaning for the Alexander family. Though Freemasonry is closely associated with symbology and secrecy, it is quite rare for Masonic buildings to be adorned with carvings like the ones at this home. Some Masons argue this building might have served as a meeting place for local Masons before an official lodge was created in the area. We do not have records of an official Mason lodge in Charlotte until 1790, and we know there were many Freemasons like Hezekiah in the area well before that date, so this theory could be correct.
My name is Kyle. I'm the registrar here at the museum. Big word that just means I take care of old stuff. I work with artifacts, I work with the buildings especially. So my tour usually talks a little bit about how the house has transformed over time. Your senses, what struck you? What do you see? What do you smell? What do you hear in here?
Smells history.
History. Yeah. It smells old.
Oh,
right?
yes.
Yeah.
Wood on it, the old wood.
Old wood, right? Yeah. Usually we associate that old smell with like wood that's dried out a lot. It's got sap coming out of it still. We've got some of that going on in here, right? What else hits you as you first come in?
Creaky floors.
Very creaky, right? Yeah. The floors over time, you'll notice they're not perfectly flat. Most of the boards themselves have a little bit of a U shape to them. From hundreds and thousands of people walking through and checking out the house. The thing that strikes me today is dark, right? Important to note, no electricity at this point in time. We're talking about 1774, over 250 years ago now. This house was built. We've reset it to look as best we can, like 1774 here in the North Carolina backcountry. Which this was the backcountry. This was not a big city like it is now. Charlotte got started through the foundations of trade in Tryon Street, which is the center of uptown these days. But at the time, it was just a trade outpost. There wasn't much else here. It's not until the early 1900s that we get the banks moving in, and we get all these giant buildings and all these people living here. So in this time, we're looking at a lot of farms, we're looking at a lot of forests, we're looking at only a few thousand people living back here. This family was the Alexander family. The man of the family, Hezekiah, brought everybody down from Pennsylvania and Maryland, where they had lived for a good while. They established their family up there. He was a blacksmith and a politician. Then some of their family moved down here to North Carolina. They said, hey, there's great plots of land, a lot of great things going on, so they ended up moving this way for more opportunity. We've just come in through the business entrance. As you have paid to be here today, I thought it was only right. The front door is there. That is the family entrance. It's in some disrepair, so I didn't bring you guys through there today. But there's also a third entrance in this house, the back door, out towards the kitchen house. It's important to mention, while Hezekiah and his wife Mary lived here, they had 10 children as well. There were also 17 people who lived here and worked here, and they didn't have the choice about where they lived or where they worked, or even if they got to see their families. There were 17 people enslaved on this site. We have most of their names, but not many of their stories, unfortunately. So I'll do my best to kind of drop little bits of knowledge that we have here or there. Just keep in mind that there's not just one story to this house, right? I like to compare it to when you're digging at the beach, right? There's all those layers of different kinds of sand, right? A lot of the time we get stuck on that top layer, what people are used to talking about with Hezekiah and his family. But there's layers and layers of depth on what happened here in our human experience. So keep that in mind as we walk around. Okay? Any questions so far? Okay. I promise there will be sections that are much more interesting than this. Here we go. We understand to have been a study. We've set up this layout based on some early floor plans, but it's important to note in the early 1900s, this house looked completely different. It had a wraparound porch on it. It didn't have this wall in it at all. It was a completely open place. So over time, they've had to reconstruct things. They've noticed marks on the floor that we call ghost marks for walls, and they put walls back in to try to make it look just like it had at the time. Also the staircase, a little bit different than it was a while before. But it's our best understanding that this would have been a study area. The room we were just in was the parlor, so that's kind of a public gathering space. People would often just kind of stop in and see the family, and that would be kind of the space for people just coming in to say hi. This was a more private space, right? This is where Hezekiah and Mary would have done some work and gotten some business done. This is one of those things I was telling you about that is over 200 years old, this desk. This is Hezekiah Alexander's original desk to the house. And we've got some reproduction things on it that we can show off here. So this desk helps us talk about why this place even exists anymore, right? There's a lot of places that existed in 1774, and most of them aren't around. In fact, this is the oldest house in Charlotte, in Mecklenburg County. So why has it existed for so long, and why haven't other things, right? It's because this guy, Hezekiah, was involved in the American Revolution. He was a writer, a politician, a dreamer, some say. He was involved both here in Charlotte, but also at the state level He was involved in the creation of the state constitution and the first couple of amendments to the Constitution. They call that the State Bill of Rights. So he was involved in some of those things. But in town, one of the biggest things we know he was part of was the creation of the Mecklenburg Declaration of Independence. I see some smirks, right? This is a controversial document. Anybody from Charlotte?
Me.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
believe in it.
Then you know. So if you don't know, if you're not from here, even if you're from North Carolina, people don't talk about it much. It's a document that the stories say was written in May 20th, 1775. We're coming up on its 250th anniversary in about a month. And if this document was real, which again is kind of debated, then it would have been the first Declaration of Independence in the United States against the crown, against Britain. Why do people say it didn't exist? Well, a few different reasons. One, Thomas Jefferson was one of the first naysayers. He had his own Declaration of Independence to publish, right? So he has some reasons to say, hey, that thing's not real. But then the original copies were all lost, supposedly in a fire. And then reproductions were put out in newspapers, and that's really all we have to work on. So that's where that chain of history, that chain of evidence kind of breaks down. But we do know that only a few days later, after that document was supposedly made, another document's made, the Mecklenburg Resolves, which sets up a system for self-governance in Charlotte at the time. My question has been, if you hadn't declared independence yet, then why did you need to create a new system of governance, right? Why do you need to set up a new system of laws if you haven't declared yourself independent from the old laws, right? So we still kind of go back and forth about it. There will be a whole exhibit next month that we're opening up to talk all about it, about whether or not it was real, but also how people have celebrated it over time. Presidents have come to town. Taft in 1909, Gerald Ford, Richard Nixon, Eisenhower, all kinds of people have come through, and we've celebrated it 100 different ways over the years. So that all ties back, though, to this central concept that Charlotte was a place of revolution at this time, right? Whether or not that document was real or not, people in Charlotte were driving out the British at the time. In fact, the British occupied this area in 1775, and the word is that Lord Cornwallis, one of the leaders of the British, as they were being run out of town, said, Charlotte is a hornet's nest of rebellion. So if you're familiar with the basketball team, the Hornets, that's where we get the name. And if you drive around town, you'll see hornets or nests on everything, from government buildings to police cars to anything, you name it. There will be hornets and wasps on stuff. So the people of Charlotte took that not as a mean nickname, but as a true testament that they were willing to fight for what they thought was right. And this desk would have stood here and watched all that happen. So that's why we still have it, why we show it off. If you guys, his handwriting style, and then his signatures at the bottom there. Usually sign it Hez Alexander, H-E-Z.
Can I understand it?
Yeah. You guys learn cursive in school?
You
Not so
learned
much.
it growing up.
Yeah. Well, I gotta say, we learned it too back in, I don't want to date myself too badly, but a while back. And we used it twice. And then all the times that our teachers said, you'll need to know cursive, they never came because we had computers by that point. So, but now I find it really helpful because I do history research, and that's the only thing they wrote it. It's called the keeping room It's kind of like a combination living room, dining room, kitchen. But the real kitchen was outside where it stands today. That building has been rebuilt, but the chimney, about half of it is original. So we know the kitchen house was right there. And to the same point, we know that food would have been brought from out there in here. Two young ladies, Bet and Jenny. Bet was Jenny's mom. They would have probably lived most of their lives inside of the kitchen house while they were enslaved here on the site. But they would have had food in there that they would have worked masterfully to make, would have crafted it with years of experience and knowledge, and then would have brought it here and most likely moved it through this window. This is called the pass-through window. You'll notice it's much smaller, and it's made to kind of swing open here. But you guys see these windows?
Mm-hmm.
How thick is that, you think?
Is that how thick the rock is?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's the entire thickness of the wall. It's maybe 2 or 3 feet thick, right? So you're not just adding a window willy-nilly, whenever you want, right? You've got to kind of draw it into the plan and make it there. So this window, this pass-through, this system where people would bring the food from the kitchen house and pass it into here without coming into the building, was built into the plan of this house, right? This tells us something about what enslavement was like here, right? It was strategic, it was planned, and they did not think it was going to change. All unfortunate realities to battle with, and it brings up a key problem for us in American history, right? The same guy who's writing about freedom and independence and wanting to fight for more rights and liberty, right, is also enslaving almost 24 people here on the site, stripping them of their humanity, of their rights, of their freedom, right? This is a problem that we still have to deal with, right? How can we be a nation based on these ideas that we want to be better and more free, but have this heritage of stripping people of their opportunity and rights? I'm not here to give answers, I'm only here to ask that question. This place is a way to discuss those things. Elsewise, this room, while being a family space for connecting and eating, they would have eaten all kinds of things from pies and soups and stews to these things called Johnny cakes or hoe cakes, basically cornmeal muffins fried up in a cast iron pan like one of those there. But this was also kind of an educational space. In fact, I'll pass these around to you here. You guys want to pass that? You've seen them. All right. These are called horn books, and they're just little practice readers for kids or even adults who are learning to read for the first time. And so they're wooden, almost like that one's kind of like a hairbrush size actually. But the material in there is not paper, it's animal horn.
I guess made out of wood.
Exactly, it comes right out of this, and you can make different kind of spoons and ladles out of it too. But you got to be skilled with it, right? You got to be able to press it and stretch it, mold it, heat it up and cool it down effectively. And then they were able to transfer with ink different writing on it there. So at this point, 1774, there's not established schools back here. So moms and dads were usually the ones sitting in rooms like this, teaching their kids how to read and write off of these little things.
Oh, yes, the brothers
Yeah, and it was pretty Protestant sect that was closer to Catholicism in its strictness, but a lot of the oldest churches in town that you'll see are Presbyterian, and they were places of revolution as well that pushed back on the tyranny of Britain. So,
You know, a couple of those Presbyterian churches, Billy Graham's parents went there. I actually went and toured some of them.
British is, it's all really
Yeah,
independent.
okay.
Hezekiah and Mary would have slept most likely.
Yeah, that's
A lot of pieces in this room are not original, but are antique instead to kind of help us show what it would have
In
looked
the
like.
time, yeah.
Yeah. A lot of these kinds of things were the things that were passed down through families and usually did not make it to museums, beds, chests, that kind of thing. So.
maybe that was like actually stuff that were from back then.
Most of this is about 100 years old, but not quite 200 years old. So most of this is newer. The desk is one of the original things. Then upstairs, a few of the walls and another desk are really, I want to say 6 or 7 other families who lived here up until 1940, and then the house was sold to the Methodist Church, and they own Aldersgate Retirement Center right next to us here. So they made a deal with the museum, and now we get to tell the history here.
Oh, you can wait right there, but we won't be long.
Yeah, there's an attic through that, and
there.
yeah, that goes all the way to the roof. That one.
Hold on.
Here, this is, I don't know, kind of a strange landing area, right? Let's talk about the elephant in the room. This is a barn loom. This is a way that they would have made rugs and blankets and all kinds of things. But it all would have started with raw material that would have been gathered, probably purchased from other people who gathered it from the land. 3 main textile sources that they used: cotton, wool that comes from sheep, and then flax that we don't really use anymore. And we've got versions of all those on this wall here that you can kind of check out and touch. I believe this is wool, this one down here is flax, and then these are cotton on that side. And they would have to take them from the ground or from the animal, process them down, and then get strands, and then use a loom like this to turn it into a complete item. I gotta say, I'm glad we have Target and Amazon nowadays. I don't think I would make it my own clothes, personally.
Was that actually made on here?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. Our loom is in a little bit of disrepair. It needs some work, but we want to get it back to a place where we can do live demonstrations with it soon. Soon it will. Sometimes they had to make clothes out of rags and bags and sheets. Sometimes what was left over. But if they had access to a loom like this, they could make much nicer pieces for themselves. Here, pretty strange, not common for the time at all. But it's kind of like those Murphy beds, if you've heard of them, that kind of fold up into walls and pull away. But this gives you a good look at rope beds, just like they were back then. You can see it's just like a checkerboard pattern of rope, and you would put a mattress on top of that, and that's what you would sleep on. Nowadays, we usually have slats or a box spring or something like that. This was the system they used back then. A mattress and then a tick. And then underneath that, there's these rope sections here, right? So you can see those squares right in there. The problem is, it's kind of like a hammock. When you sleep on it, and sleep on it, and sleep on it, rope wants to loosen up on itself. So it'll start kind of sagging in the middle. So eventually, you got to get this big old thing. It's called a bed wrench or a bed key, and you would have to use it on the ropes on the side to tug and twist the slack, the looseness from the center of the bed to the outsides. But these go all the way down to the end. So you gotta pull it all the way through the netting, and then you get to the end at the knot where you can pull it through. As you're doing that, there's the stake and the mallet. So you can use that inside there to hold your tension, so it doesn't just slide back on you. Then you tie this off again, and make sure that the bed stays nice and tight, so it can hold you up while you're sleeping. Yeah. So this is the boys' room. There were 7 boys, is our understanding. So this room and the next room. Then there were about 3 girls. So we interpret the other room there on the other side as the girls' room. Nobody's got their own bed, right? It's a lot of shared space, a lot of time with your siblings. Those of us with siblings, man, it takes a toll on you. So you can imagine it's not quiet in here, right? There's kids running around all the time. They're sneaking around at night, using candles instead of flashlights and stuff, right? They might have even had a toy chest like this, and they would have been sneaking around trying to play games maybe in the middle of the night. This would have been maybe the worst one because it's so loud. Cup and ball set. And the whole point there is to just try to get the ball in the cup. My gosh, it's impossible. Hardest game ever made. I hit it one time on tour. It was a beautiful day. You guys want to give it a shot? It's tricky. It's a tricky one.
You know what that is?
Yeah. What? So we mentioned a few rooms that we have in our house, right? There's some bedrooms. There's a kitchen, a dining room.
No bathroom.
We haven't talked about bathrooms, right? There's no bathrooms in this house.
No bathroom.
Yeah,
Oh,
so,
wow.
Yeah.
So it's,
How'd you know? Oh, I almost got it.
that was close. So instead,
How'd you know?
Because I'm old.
when you've been around a while, you hear these stories a little bit. This was what they called a chamber pot. And this was the pot that sat in your chambers in your room. And if you didn't want to go to the outhouse or the woods outside where you would usually do your business, you would go to the bathroom instead. And then you open the window in the morning and you would dump it right out the window. They did not understand fully how our bodies work, how we get sick, what makes us healthy. A little bit of a different system of thinking back then. They were not dumb, but just thought differently. The system that they worked with was called the humoral theory. They thought there were 4 liquids in everybody's body: blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm. And they're not wrong. We do all have those things in us. But they thought it was having all those things in combination at the right levels in us that kept us healthy. So this is where we get the practices of like bleeding and like leeches like that, because they would say, oh, you've got XYZ going on in you, you've got too much blood, you've got to reduce your blood level. We know now that that's pretty unhealthy for you. You know, that makes you weaker, and a few times they actually ended up bleeding people too much. Science back then, a different game. We've come a long way in 200 years, for sure. It looks a little bit different than the other walls, right? It's a little less orange. It's a little more splintery. It's because it's actually 250 years old. The other wall here, going back towards the loom, that wall has been put back in. You'll notice it's much more together. There's no gaps in it. But the older wall, you can kind of see some splits. You notice some marking on it. Yeah.
Is this bed right here original to the house? This one right here?
This fold-up bed.
Yes.
This one's not, but we know that it was here for certain. So we put it back in to represent the bed that was there.
So this would be the Alexander's bedroom in here, right?
Sort of in the younger girl's room. Here.
Where were the Alexanders?
Mom and Dad, they would have had that room downstairs.
Oh,
next to
so you
the-
don't have the room no more.
It would have been the one down by the kitchen.
Oh, okay, so the room's out of this house no more.
Well, not the original.
There's no bedroom.
Just the girls' room?
Oh, okay. That's a good question.
I wish we did. It would make my job a lot easier. I'll take it. So in here, you might recognize that big old wheel from stories like Sleeping Beauty. This was a way to process some of those things we were talking about in the hall here. You would spin down cotton. It comes in these big long strands, and you want it to be like string so you can actually make stuff out of it, right? This would be how you would do that. You would spin it down and it would twist on itself. And as it twists, it gets really tight and really skinny. Then you would take it from there. It's like this big unmanageable ball. You'd put it on this puller, cotton puller, wool puller, some people call it. And it would make these pre-measured lengths that you could work with. Those lengths were called skeins. That's not a word that really means much anymore, but was important for them, so they knew exactly how many lengths they were working with. They wouldn't have to measure it out every single time. Would have had a lot of this practical knowledge about how to create things, about how to make things, and would have had an opportunity in this family, because this family was so well off. They would be able to learn how to read, how to write, might even get a chance to go to school later in time. Those were not usually afforded to women at the time, unfortunately. Again, some of those ideas that Hezekiah is writing about, right? Freedoms, liberties, right? One of those freedoms is education, but even the women in his own family didn't always have the freedom to learn some of the basic things that we learn nowadays. On the left, there's what looks like an angle with a V in it, and then kind of lightly there's a leaf shape. We think that's a trowel, like a bricklaying trowel. On the other side, you'll see a heart, and then some kind of square with 3 lines coming into it. We have not figured out exactly what that is, but we think all of that is related to the age of the house and the fact that Hezekiah was a Freemason, secret fraternal order that had a lot of rituals, but was mostly just a social group.
Okay, everybody, I hope you enjoyed that tour of the Hezekiah Alexander house. I'll see you another day in another adventure. Thank you for watching.